To set the stage for this, we must go back to the far-off year of 1988. The location is Cascade Mountains of Oregon. I was 10 years old, and with me was my mum, dad, best friend, and our golden retriever, Amber. We were very much an outdoor family, and had many camping trips before this and since. But to this day, when I think about it, I still remember the terror I felt that weekend so long ago. After a brief talk with my father recently, it kind of came back to the front of my mind. He also was able to fill in a few details that I had forgotten. This holiday was like many others. We packed up the station wagon with everything we would need for the hike into our favorite lakes to camp at. To make this trip even more exciting for me was the fact it was my birthday weekend, and I got to pick this lake. After we arrived at the trail and got our packs on, my dad got his sidearm out and strapped it to his belt. In Oregon, open carry was permitted in national forests, and my dad always had a gun on his hip while in the woods, which would always add a sense of security. We had a close call with a bear one time, so it came in handy. The lake was about a 4-mile moderate hike through some thick forest, but the trail itself was well maintained and was never very busy, so it was going to be a very pleasant hike in. We started off our hike, and back in the 80s it was not uncommon to have your dog off a leash on the trails in the forest, so we let Amber run and do her thing. She was a good dog and never ran off for too long or jumped on people. She did love people though, and speaking of people, we had not seen anyone else on this trail for about 2 miles into the hike, which was nice since it was just all of us talking, laughing, and enjoying nature. My best friend and I started to hike ahead of everyone else because we were so energized and had the exciting feeling about finding the first and best spot once we had gotten to the lake. Amber was bounding ahead of us, having a great time too. We were about 20 yards ahead of my parents when Amber stopped dead in her tracks. I thought maybe she saw a chipmunk or something, maybe a bird. But her hackles came up and she let out the lowest growl. She never growls, so we stopped walking, and I thought maybe a deer or a bear or something was just off the trail, and she had seen it or heard it. We immediately started walking backwards towards my parents, and they caught up with us. My dad asked us what was going on, and I told him that Amber is up the trail and growling at something. He tells us girls to stay back with my mum, and he walks ahead to where Amber was on the trail. My dad catches up to her on the trail and looks around. I hear Amber whimper a bit while looking off the trail. My dad comforts her and calls her back and walks back to us. He says it must have been an animal, and he did not see anything right off the trail or ahead of us. He says to let him take the lead, and we continue to hike. It did not take long before it was forgotten, and Amber and the rest of us were having a good time again. We arrived at the lake, and much to my delight, there was no one else there camping. The water was clean and blue, and the shade from the trees, which made the whole scene just perfect. My friend and I found what we thought to be the best spot to set up our tent, and my parents followed suit. After we had a camp set up, my folks went off to fish just down the hill, and my friend and I took off with Amber to walk around to the other side of the lake to catch salamanders. We only made it around 1/8 of a mile when Amber stopped and started to growl. We stopped and looked around and heard bush rustle. Then, right in front of us, a man walked out of the trees. Amber stayed right by our sides and started to bare her teeth at the man. He was taller than my dad, at least 6'4". He was very skinny, but had very broad shoulders. He was clean cut and was wearing black jeans and a white polo shirt with loafers. I mean, he did not look like he had hiked at all, or was even dressed for the outdoors. He almost looked like he had just come out of church. We just stood there, trying to process the situation, when Amber began to bark. The guy just stood there, not moving, and he smiled, like the creepiest smile. It felt like someone who thought that was what a smile was supposed to look like. Amber kept barking, and this got my parents' attention, and they look up to us and call out for us to come back. We complied and started to walk back towards them. My father met us halfway and told us to go back to the campsite, and he was going to talk to the guy. We got back to our camp, and my mum sat with us. I could hear my dad asking the guy if he needed help, or if he was in any sort of trouble, or if he was a camper who had just set up camp away from the lake. My dad was being polite and calm, but I could see that he was on his guard and trying to feel out the situation. Now is the time to mention that my dad is ex-army and can be very intimidating when needed. The conversation continues. The guy told my dad he was just on a walk and did not mean to intrude on us. The guy says his goodbye and walks back into the woods. My dad walked back to the camp, sat down and told us that he thinks the guy must be some sort of yappy camper and does not know much about the outdoors. But my dad said that he got a weird vibe of him and would be keeping an eye out for him. Amber stayed by our side and was calm, yet she kept looking towards the direction that the guy went. A bit more time goes by, and we have a nice campfire going and the sun is setting. We cooked some dinner and made s'mores afterwards. My friend and I decided to go to our tent and read some books and tell each other some scary stories. Amber followed us to the tent and laid outside, just outside of the door. My parents walked down to the lake to sit, have a beer and just chill. They were never more than 50 yards away. Not long after my parents walked away, I heard Amber start to growl. Then we hear footsteps coming from the woods behind our tent. My friend and I turn off our flashlights and go quiet to listen. The footsteps stop at the edge of the woods. Then we hear heavy breathing and a grunting sound. Amber starts to bark, and we hear the footsteps retreat into the woods. Amber whimpers for a bit, and then I hear my parents walking back to the camp. I go out and tell them what had happened. My dad said that he heard Amber barking, and that is why they were coming back up. I asked my dad what we should do, what is going on, and if that strange guy was the one creeping around. He tells me that we will see about moving camp in the morning, since we still have 3 days left on the trip, and nothing has happened to warrant just leaving. But he added that he'll play it by ear, and just to be a little bit more vigilant, and if something changes, we will decide what to do next. He tells us to try to get some sleep, and we'll turn in for the night. The next morning we get up and have breakfast. After breakfast we head down to the lake to fish. It was a beautiful day, and we were having so much fun. The events from the prior day were almost forgotten. We decided around lunchtime that we would go for a short hike to the waterfall that is just up from the lake. We were gone for only about an hour, and when we came back, we found our tents were opened and our sleeping bags were dragged out onto the ground. My dad tells us to hang back with Mum, and he goes in to investigate. He comes back and says nothing is missing, but it was not an animal who did this. He says we should break camp, hike back to the car, and find another spot to camp for the next couple of days. I could tell my dad was not wanting to frighten us, but I heard the urgency in his voice. I was very disappointed, but if it meant we could enjoy the rest of our trip and not worry about some creep messing with us, then it was worth it. We broke camp and started to hike back. Dad was in the lead, and we were double timing it to make it back to the car in record time. As we walked over to the car, we see that one of our tires was flat. Not a big deal though, we always had a spare. But when my dad bent down to start taking the lugs off, we swore it was not just a flat. Someone had slashed the tires. Dad changed that tire in record time and we threw everything into the car. And he goes to turn the car on, but it wouldn't start. Dad swears, gets out of the car and pops the hood. He mutters crap. It turns out that someone took our spark plug wires. Old cars like that Chevy wagon did not have an internal hood release. You could just pop the hood from outside. Dad slams the hood and says some very colourful words and kicks some rocks. We were stuck, and no one else was on the trailhead. We were stranded. My parents are calm under pressure, and after a few minutes of discussion it was decided that Dad would start walking down the road until he could hitch a ride to town and go to an auto parts store. Mum and the rest of us were going to wait with the car and look for someone to hopefully pull into the trailhead and help us. A few hours go by and no one has come to the trailhead. It's getting hot and we're hungry and tired. Mum makes us some lunch and we go sit under a tree to cool off. Amber is by our side and was calm, but then we hear a voice. Amber leaps up and starts whimpering. The creepy guy from yesterday comes down the trail and is asking my mum if we need help. My mum tells him we're fine, that it is being settled and that my dad will be back soon. This creep then tells her his camp is close and he parked on one of the old fire roads that is near the lake and asks us if we would like to come to his camp and wait until my dad returns. My mother sternly tells him no, that we're just waiting here and will happily do so, and thank you anyway. He does not like this. He tells my mum that it's not safe out here for a pretty lady and two young girls. My mum, like my dad, is no pushover and asserts herself again, explaining that we do not need any help and asks to please leave us alone. The guy just stands there, smiles wide, and then just turns around and leaves. My mum is visibly shaken, and us girls were also just a bit scared. My mum comes over to us and tells us that we need to stay close and not to wander, and that it will be okay. My friend and I are kind of freaked out, understandably, and we're just hoping that my dad will make it back soon. After about another 30 minutes, the creepy guy comes back. This time he's not alone and has a slightly younger guy with him. The other guy is also dressed as a yappy camper and had a very stern look on his face. My mother once again stands her ground as they approach. Amber starts a low growl and her hackles go up. The two guys flank us and one of them flashes a gun tucked into his belt. The older guy tells us that we need to go with them and that they were not asking. My mum backs up next to us and without taking her eyes off them, reaches to her belt and pulls out her bowie knife. My mother said that we would not be going with them and that they needed to leave now. The men didn't even flinch at this and said that we will come with them or they will hurt us. At this moment though, Amber goes from just growling and barking and puts herself between us and them. She makes the guys stop. My mum yells that they need to leave now, and they start backing up. At that moment, we hear a truck pulling into the trailhead parking lot. At the side of the truck, the guys start to walk away fast and disappear into the tree line. The truck was a forest ranger, and he had my dad with him. My dad jumped out of the truck and ran over to us, asking if we were okay. The ranger came over and asking who those men were and if we were okay. My mum explained everything while Dad hugged us girls and told us that we would be okay. The ranger takes off and goes looking for the men. My dad tells us that he was about 5 miles from the town when the ranger picked him up and took him the rest of the way to get the part that we needed. He then drove him back to our car, and after hearing what had happened, my dad was so angry that he wanted to find the guys who tried to kidnap us and had been terrorizing us for the past 24 hours. The ranger came back and told us he had almost caught up to them, but they sped away, their truck with a camper in tow. They had been parked behind a small ridge behind the lake on the old logging road. He was unable to get a plate, but he radioed the description of the men and their truck and camper to the local sheriff's office. He also took our information and said that he had passed it on to them. He waited with us until my dad had fully fixed the car, and we were able to leave. We decided not to finish our camping trip. Instead, we drove a couple of hours to spend the last 2 days of the trip at the beach and stay in a hotel. A few days later, a deputy called my dad and told him they never found the men. He said that it was most likely a crime of opportunity after seeing a woman with 2 girls in tow. He was sure that they had been watching us from off the trail and had messed with our camp to judge how my father would react. When my dad seemed to be too big of a threat, they sabotaged our car, hoping to put us into a position where we were vulnerable. He said they would follow up with us if they found anything else out, but according to my father, nothing ever came of it. Years later, I tried to do some research on crimes in that area of Oregon. During the 80s, that might have involved something like what we had experienced. All I could find was a few reports of campers being robbed and a few cars broken into. There was one case of a young lady and her dog going missing from the area near where we were, but it was never determined what had happened to her, or even if it was something bad, or if she had just run away. I can tell you that we did go back to that lake a few years later, and had a very uneventful camping trip. It was nice to go back and find some joy in a spot that was very special to me. I really hope those creeper guys never hurt anyone, and maybe were caught for other crimes. I will never know though. I just hope to never run into a situation like that again. I can say that having a dog along with us helped our situation. She was the hero and kept us alert. Amber went to live until she was 12 years old and passed with her favorite people around her. Remember to stay safe. Stay watchful, and it never hurts to have a sweet, brave dog with you. Back in 2016, my friends and I for the longest time had been itching to go camping at our local camping site in the Los Paredes National Park in Southern California. When we found the perfect weekend to go that didn't interfere with any of our work schedules, we set up the date. 3 days before the trip, we found out we were going to get hit by an El Nino rainstorm. Us, being the type of dudes that we didn't really care about getting hit by the storm while camping. So we packed up our car and made the 45-minute drive to the campsite. The campsite was a family-friendly zone. There were about 100 camping lots, and they circled around a clearing in the forest. We found the perfect spot that was underneath the huge thicket of trees that would help block as much rain as possible, and it helped out that the restrooms were only 30 yards away. As soon as we got our spot, we took advantage of the afternoon sky being clear for the moment, and we rushed to set up our camping equipment and tents. The layout that we did was that we pitched our tents close by, where our tent doors were only about 6 feet apart. The reason for this is because in order to combat the rain, I brought a 30 by 30 thick blue canopy tarp that I threw over to cover us from the coming rain from above and the rain that would be running through the ground. It was a genius move on my part, but whenever you would walk around our tent, you would be making so much noise from the crunching plastic tarp. Hours passed and we were all around the campfire, It was late into the evening, and this was the first time that I noticed that there were barely any other campers. They were mainly camping in RVs, like the fake campers they were. In my honest opinion, they were the smart ones, unlike my friends and I that were sleeping in two small tents with our only protection being a blue tarp. I was getting tired from a long day of work, and I decided that I was going to go to bed. My friends followed my lead as well. The way that the sleeping arrangements were was that I had my friend Ray sleeping in my tent, and AJ and S were sleeping in theirs. Before I called it a night, I whispered to Ray and told him, I'm going to go prank call S and J, but I'm not going to say anything. Ray smiled as I dialed my friend's number. I called them on a restricted number, and S's phone started to ring off. Both of them, being the way that they were, got timid very easily as they said to one another, Who's calling this late at night? I don't know, they called me on a restricted number. Are you going to answer? Of course not. Ray and I were holding in our laughter as they ignored our call. I decided to do it one more time. Once their phones started to ring, they started to freak out again and just said, Who is it this time? Same person, I think. I'm going to answer. As they did, S said in a very shaky tone, Hello? Ray and I had to hold in our laughter as we kept quiet as possible, not wanting to make any noise that would give off that we were the ones doing the prank call. I held the phone close to my mouth and began to breathe heavily into the microphone. I ended the call, and just hearing them freak out the way they did was making my night even funnier. Me being the idiot that I am, I called them one more time, and this time S picked up the phone immediately and said in a tough voice, Look, whoever this is, better stop. I'm about to call the cops. If you keep on calling, then I'll do it. This is not a threat. Ray and I looked at each other at the same time and began to fake moan so loud and immediately started to bawl out with laughter. AJ and S were so mad at us for pulling this prank on them, and they started cursing us out. Me finally calming down from my laughter so loud, I told the boys good night and that I'll have pancakes ready in the morning. Since I fell asleep relatively easy, it was a matter of seconds before I was out like a light. I was the first of my friends to wake up in the morning, and as I promised, I had the pancakes already cooking by the time anyone else woke up. The smell of me cooking woke up my friends, and one by one they got out of their tents. As we were eating, AJ spoke and said, Hey Jay, that prank you pulled last night went too far, man. Yeah, you had us ready to run to our cars and take off. Me, feeling a bit guilty, apologized and said, I'm sorry guys, my bad. Then they said, yeah, it's one thing to prank call us like that, but then to walk around our tent and go inside the middle of the night is totally off limits, S said. Me not knowing what they're talking about, I'm like, what do you guys mean? Come on, still with the jokes? You were the one walking around our tent last night, and you walked in, right? Ray spoke up and said, that wasn't Jay who was walking around. I thought it was you two getting your revenge on us for scaring you. That wasn't us doing that. It was you two. So, to explain, after I fell asleep, about an hour had passed where Ray, S, and AJ were still up, and all was quiet in the forest until the sound of footsteps was heard stepping on our blue tarp, the one that I mentioned earlier we had on the ground. At first my friends thought that it could have just been a forest animal wandering around, but the heavy footsteps were a dead giveaway that it was a person. As they described it, the person was walking all around our tents, making constant figure eights. The person would place their fingers on the tent's fabric and run them up and down, then footsteps finally stopped after a couple of minutes, right in between our tent doors. The three of them were already having their hearts pounding out of their chest. It was silent for a long minute until the sound of the tent zipper began to slit open. As AJ says it, the tent door was only opened halfway, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. But in the darkness, both S and J saw the silhouette of a man's face popping his head into the tent to look at both of them. AJ and S faked being asleep the entire time, but they kept their eyes locked onto the man. The man then opened the tent fully and walked inside the tent, just standing at the entrance. The man didn't say a word or do anything, just watched them both laying there in their sleeping bags. After the longest minute ever, the man just took his steps out of the tent, and his footsteps were heard walking away and disappearing into the night. The entire time this was happening, S and AJ thought it was either me or Ray doing this, and Ray thought that it was AJ or S doing it. Back to us arguing again back and forth, the breakfast table was going mental when we were interrupted by a man walking to our campsite, and he said, "Good morning, boys. How did the four of you sleep last night?" The man sounded like he had been smoking for 45 years. He wore a dirty, sweat-stained white t-shirt that looked more grey at this point, and his blue jeans looked as if they had never been taken off from his legs. He smelt like liquor, not a good sign at 8 o'clock in the morning, and his words were mumbling around. We didn't say a word to this guy. He then asked us if we had any cigarettes to spare for him. I said that we didn't smoke, and he said, "Oh well, if you boys want to visit me in my RV, just stop by any time." The man continued to walk away towards the restrooms, and as he was done using it, he walked back to our campsite. He didn't say anything this time, but he looked at us and just gave us a nearly toothless smile and walked back to his RV. I took note of his RV, as it was the only RV that stuck out, being dirty and more run down than the others. We quickly summed up the man as the person who had walked around our tent last night. S and AJ now remember that they could smell liquor from the person who was standing in their tent. We all agreed that we would keep an extra eye out for this guy, and if he did spend another night, we would most likely report him to the park rangers if he tried anything else. When it was around lunchtime, the man came back, not to use the restroom, but just to talk to us. "So, any of you boys interested in buying an RV? You can go check it out right now and see if you want to buy it. I don't need it anymore since my wife left me. Just check out inside the RV." "No, we're good, sir," I said with a visible threatening tone. The man seemed to notice this, and he walked away. The man did end up leaving a few hours before the sun set, but the entire time he was there, he kept glancing at us. The man had his RV about 50 yards away from us, and I noticed that he had a restroom right next to his RV. So why did he make the effort to walk all the way around over to our campsite to use the restroom? Also, why did he even use ours if RVs come with restrooms installed inside them? Whatever the man wanted, we were just glad that we were about to enjoy the rest of our weekend. So, me, my husband, my daughter, 7, and niece, 8, came camping this weekend. We've camped at this place 4 times, never had any issues. Last night we were sitting up about to start making dinner. This was at about 8 p.m. when my daughter looks at me, looks behind me, looks back at me. I asked her what. She said, "Look behind you." There's a little kid, couldn't be more than 6 years old, just standing there watching my daughter and niece play with a soccer ball. I figured he was camping here too, and was just interested in what they were doing. My daughter invites him to play, and he runs back into the woods like he got scared. I didn't see him for about 15 minutes, so I figured he just went back to his campsite. Then he comes back at this point. It's dark outside, so we ask him where his parents are. He said he doesn't have parents. So I'm like, what? Then my husband asked if he was camping here. He screamed at my husband. My parents are dead, and I'm homeless. I sleep in the woods. I said, okay, well, that's not safe at all, little buddy. I'm going to call somebody to help you. He said, please call them. I don't have any family. So I start calling on emergency line and give him some food and a Gatorade and told him to hang out until help got here. The cops got there about 10 minutes later. They start trying to talk to him. He takes off running into the woods and yells that his brother will be back for us. The cops chase him. I have no idea what happened after that, but I did not sleep a wink last night. It was literally the creepiest thing I've ever dealt with in my life. There are no houses within 10 miles of here, so I'm worried about him. But I'm also so creeped out about the brother thing. Update. The child was a runaway from his new foster home. Sleeps in the woods equaled that they had been camping. Confirmed the parents have in fact passed away. He doesn't have a brother that the police or the foster family know of, and no idea why he ran from the police. Maybe he was just scared. Hello everyone, Grimm here. Welcome to the end of the video, and thank you for making it all the way through. Please remember to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. Well, that's it. I've got nothing more to say, I suppose. Be safe wherever you are. Have an amazing night or day, and as always, I'm Grimm, and I'm, well, signing off.